Puts it upstairs, down deep, intended for Reiser. It's intercepted by Deion Sanders. What a catch! Braves on the freeze option, wants to run the pitch. He's hit, dropped by Marvin Jones. Sacked to the backfield.
It is my honor to announce the winner of the 1993 John W. Heisman Memorial Trophy, Charlie Ward of Florida State University.
In 1946, Florida State University had no stadium, had no uniforms or helmets, had no coach, and didn't have a football team. Then in 1947, a mere 6 weeks after the decision to play college football was announced, the Florida State football program was born amidst the dimly lit lights of what used to be Centennial Field. Virtually overnight, a dream became reality with the first game versus Stetson. From those humble beginnings, Florida State has grown into a major college football powerhouse, achieving several milestones along the way. The Seminoles became the first team in the state of Florida to go to a bowl in 1950 and to play in an out-of-state bowl game, traveling to El Paso for the 1955 Sun Bowl. In 1993, the Seminoles became the only football program started after World War II to win a national championship. Currently, the Seminoles have finished in the Associated Press top 4 a record 9 straight years and have one of the finest bowl records in the land. Year in and year out, the Seminoles are contenders for the national crown. There's no doubt that the first 50 years of Seminole football have been Garnet and Golden.
Tradition. When it comes to college football, the word conjures up images of Newt Rockne, Bear Bryant, no helmet football, and the Army-Navy game. Schools celebrating their 100th year of football boast of a grand tradition. But Florida State, which will begin its 50th year of college football in the fall of 1996, has proven that it doesn't take 100 years to build tradition. All it takes is success. Classic games like Bill Peterson's 1967 squad's 37-37 tie against Bear Bryant and defending national champion Alabama, or the Seminoles' miraculous 28-point fourth-quarter comeback against the Florida Gators in 1994. Legendary coaches like Tom Nugent, who popularized the I formation, or Bobby Bowden, who is one of just 2 active head coaches with over 250 career victories. Award winners like Florida State's first Little All-American, Hugh Adams, its first consensus All-American, Fred Biletnikoff, or the school's first Heisman Trophy winner, Charlie Ward. Storied seasons, from the first undefeated season of 1950 to the unbeaten 1979 campaign, to the national title season of 1993. Many might think a school so young would lack its own legendary figures, but this is far from the truth. In only 50 short years, FSU has amassed their own great traditions. Who will ever forget the shaved heads and ferocious defensive play of the 7 Magnificents, or the impressive upset sprung by the king of the road, Bobby Bowden, or the colorful nicknames associated with All-American play at FSU, like Jingle Joints, Ron Sellers, or Prime Time, Deion Sanders. And while college football is full of symbols, the entire nation knows that Chief Osceola rides tall and wins every race. College football is a consuming passion that binds like no other. It's that passion that ties the 5 decades of Seminole football to their foundation. Florida State University's tradition might be short on years, but in terms of achievement, All-Americans, bowl success, national award winners, and simply in heart, grit, determination, and pride, Seminole football boasts a tradition few schools can match. In 1947, amongst the red bricks and Spanish moss of Tallahassee, a university was beginning to take on a new personality. No longer Florida Intercollegiate College for Women, Florida State University had become coeducational, and with this change, the school quickly embarked on intercollegiate athletics. Actually, intercollegiate football was not a complete stranger to Tallahassee. Florida State College played 3 years of early century football beginning in 1902. In fact, in 1904, the school even won a title, being crowned Florida's state champions. However, fundamental changes in the higher education system led to the canceling of intercollegiate sports, while the school went on to become one of the nation's finest women's colleges. So, for all intents and purposes, Florida State football, as we know it, was born under the muted lights of Centennial Field on October 18, 1947, against Stetson University. The team was led onto the field that night by head coach Ed Williamson, who served as the school's unpaid intramural director. The football program offered no scholarships, had no team name, no real stadium, and set out to compete with just over a month to prepare for its first ever game.
We didn't have any locker rooms. The boys had to dress in the barracks that was on West Campus. And they dressed there. They washed their own uniforms, or the wives washed them if they had a wife. And it just wasn't anything like they have today.
Our pants were made out of that hard canvas. You know what I'm talking about. It was real, and the pads kind of slipped in there, and they were not plastic or what do you want to call fiberglass kind of pads today. These things we're talking about, they were hard, stiff pads. Shoulder pads had very little flex to them. The helmets were made. We played probably the first year we played was the last year of the leather helmets.
The Garnet and Gold, as they were known on that night, launched a valiant attack to take an early lead before succumbing 14-6. Charles McMillan of Quincy, Florida, hauled in the school's first touchdown catch.
Well, everybody was waiting with great anticipation. Most of us were on that first squad, were just pick-up group of young men that wanted to play football. Centennial Field was real crowded that night. The stands were filled. A lot of people were there, a lot of excitement because it was the first intercollegiate game in Tallahassee.
Known as the Garnet and Gold for the first game, it was realized that Florida State's new team needed an identity. Students suggested names, and soon a list of suggestions had been narrowed to 6 finalists. Campus gossip had it that the Crackers would win in a cakewalk. Seminoles were the favorite of many, but far from an overwhelming choice. 1/4 of the student body eventually voted on the name, with many doctoring ballots to assure that Seminoles would win. In the end, Seminoles won by a mere 110 votes over Statesmen. In 1948, the coaching whistle was turned over to the capable hands of Don Veller. A former Indiana University and Big Ten All-Star, Veller knew big-time college football and turned his FSU tenure into a time of many firsts for the young program. Doleful Don, as he later would be dubbed, did it with mirrors. He had no scholarship players, a sand-strewn practice field at abandoned Dale Mabry Air Force Base, and a stadium without locker rooms.
It was dusty as heck. Oh, it was, we had to sprinkle almost everywhere, almost hand sprinkle most of the time before we could practice because it was so dusty. And we had redone an old bandstand and it was our locker room and coach's room and everything.
Veller's Seminoles won a remarkable 30 of his first 34 contests. On October 9th, 1948, the curtain was raised on Veller's first season in a game versus Cumberland. Later that night, the city of Tallahassee and the school's fans had a victory to bask in. Led by Ken McLean, who carried the ball 16 times for an impressive 146 yards, FSU prevailed for a 30-0 victory. That night, the Seminoles ran Veller's cockeyed T offense to perfection.
It was an unbalanced line, and we could play some single wing, and the quarterback was up underneath the center like he is now, but he could shift out of that, move out of that. One man can be in motion backwards.
In 1948, the Seminoles would join the Dixie Conference, where they dominated play for the next 3 seasons, winning 3 straight league titles. The year also produced FSU's first small school Little All-American, tackle Hugh Adams. 1948 also marked the arrival of one of the most famous icons of Seminole football, and a first-time cheer. Many FSU fans hear the nickname Old Ironsides and assume it refers to a rough and ready player or a stout defensive line. But in Florida State lore, the name refers to the 1942 Beck motor coach bus that became the Seminoles' transportation to road games until 1961.
We got it in 1948, so it was used all during the war years, pretty hot and heavy. Had a lot of miles on it, and the engine was not in the best shape in the world.
It must have had about 300,000 miles when they bought it. They thought they'd buy something real great, but it would break down every time we would get out. Almost every time we'd have to go out and push it.
From day one of Florida State football, the Seminoles were underdogs, and like most underdogs, the newly formed tribe were a group of overachievers with uncommon spirit. Personifying that spirit was a man who never played the game. At 5'4", Doug Bonifay stood about as tall as FSU football did at the time. However, in 1947, he played as big a part as anyone in the beginning of Seminole tradition.
I jumped up on the table and said FSU one time, and everybody yelled. So I said FSU 2 times, and everybody yelled. And FSU 3 times, and everybody yelled. So then I said, well, FSU all the damn time, and then they went crazy.
Anytime a game was going slowly, Bonifay would be hoisted atop the crowd and passed up and down the stands, riling up the fans with FSU all the damn time.
FSU 2 times. FSU 3 times. FSU all the damn time.
"1949 will best be remembered for 3 things. In a contest against Whiting Field, FSU produced one of the most productive quarters in school history. The tribe's offense exploded for 5 touchdowns in the second period, en route to a blowout 74-0 victory.
The coach at Great Lakes Naval Training Station, which had another football powerhouse, the guy called me right after and said, can you give me a report on Whiting Field? And I said, no, I can't tell you. I said, they're so bad that you don't need any scouting notes. Anyhow, that following weekend, they played them, and Whiting Field beat Great Lakes. And I was so embarrassed.
The Seminoles' 11-game winning streak came to an end versus a Livingston State squad coached by Von Mancha, who would later move to Florida State as an assistant head coach and athletic director. In a game promoted locally by the city of Selma, Alabama, signals got crossed on who was to hire the game's officials.
We were discussing with the promotion people in Selma. I said, We used high school officials back in those days, both of us. And I told him, I said, he wanted to use the local group because it was free. It was all charity. It was a fundraising thing. And I said, no, don't get the local officials. That looks kind of funny.
We got ready to kick off, and there were no officials. And he came over and told me, he says, I'm sorry, there are no officials. We have to get them out of the stands.
Held Veller up for a few minutes and told him at the officials, I hope they didn't have a wreck or something, that we might have to hold the game up. I hope that, you know.
They've finally got some officials, some people out of the stands. And they weren't crooked. They just didn't call anything.
Veller never accepted it. He felt like we'd framed him on the officials. Well, then he hired me later on, as you know, and of course I told him one day that, well, unfortunately about that, it was about 4 of those officials played with me at Alabama.
A successful 8-1 season earned the Seminoles their first bowl invitation. The Cigar Bowl would match Florida State against Wofford, winners of 23 straight contests. The bid was an honor for FSU, which had eluded other state schools with longer football histories. The Seminoles upended Wofford 19-6, but the game was not a total success. FSU players were promised watches for their efforts, but instead, each received a rubber football stamped with a Cigar Bowl logo. To make matters worse, several players spotted those same footballs in local Tampa stores, selling for 39 cents. By the time the 1950 season rolled around, FSU was beginning to outgrow previous opponents. If Florida State was to play big-time college football, it would need a big-time college football stadium. Tallahassee businessman Rainey Coffin and members of the Tallahassee Athletic Council sold 1,000 5-year season ticket packages to help finance a stadium. On October 28, 1950, Doak S. Campbell Stadium was dedicated in honor of the university president who fought as hard as anyone to establish the program. A new stadium wasn't the only highlight of that homecoming night. FSU also got itself a fight song. In a contest to name the school band, FSU student Pat Gunno's entry of Marching Chiefs was proclaimed the winner, and the Chiefs were introduced that evening for the first time. They introduced a song that will always spark emotions in the hearts of Seminole fans. The Seminole fight song featured words by class of 1950 alumnus Doug Alley and an arrangement by professor of music Tommy Wright. With the ingredients for tradition being added to the mix, the 1950 team went undefeated, a first for Florida State. The famed Ice Bowl versus Tampa, with game-time temperatures in Tallahassee as low as 12 degrees, would conclude the unblemished run.
I think I've heard that 10,000 people tell me they were at that game, and they couldn't have been because the stands were completely empty. People got in their cars.
The contest was tied at 13 entering the fourth quarter before FSU erupted for the 35-19 win. With the win, FSU claimed yet another Dixie Conference championship. The 1950 season also gave Seminole faithful a look at a young Howard quarterback that would later return to FSU to make quite a name for himself, Bobby Bowden. 1951 and 52 were transition years into big-time college football. FSU withdrew from the undefeated comfort of the Dixie Conference and added teams like the Miami Hurricanes. Miami became the first national opponent to play the Tribe, establishing an excitement-filled rivalry that remains FSU's oldest to this day. Veller brought the Tribe to the brink of major college football status, but retired while on top following the 1952 season. Much credit for FSU's football growth goes to Veller, whose sound and spectacular coaching helped the Seminoles earn a reputation, young, hungry, and eager to compete quickly. '53 was a year of change for FSU. And the man who would lead the tribe into the world of major college football was Tom Nugent. Nugent was a showman with great flair, a dreamer with a vast imagination.
Incredible coach in terms of being innovative. We were the first team. He invented the I formation. He invented the typewriter huddle. He invented the, well, we call it the lonesome man, but it was wide out. And we also practiced the huddle more than we practiced football. We had a great huddle.
I used to love to go to practice. And the reason I used to love to go to practice because I couldn't wait to find out what we were going to do new or different under Tom Nugent. Tom was such an innovator and so enthusiastic about everything he was doing and the direction he was taking, the university.
1953 would be the last year of FSU's small school status. The year would bring a recruit to Tallahassee who was possibly the most valuable of Nugent's tenure. Lee Corso, a Miami native who excelled at quarterback, defensive back, and running back.
I decided basically, though, to go to Florida State because I thought that I wanted to be able to build something. I wanted to be able to be a part of a starting of a tradition. So I felt that if I could go there, maybe I could help start a football tradition at a great school.
The season began with an early victory versus the Johnny Unitas-led Louisville Cardinals, 59-0. 53 would also bring Nugent's most memorable win in a game versus his former school, Virginia Military Institute, and the nation's leading rusher at the time, Johnny Mapp.
So I told the players, and I put it really to them because I was telling them God's truth. I said, I will never, I promise you, I will never ask my final team, wherever it happens to be, I will never ask them to win a game for me. I'll sacrifice it to ask you to win this game for me. This is my one game. And I told them how I felt. And they rallied around. Boy, I saw a lot of tears. It was a great, wonderful feeling.
The Tampa matchup concluded the season. Bobby Five-Ash, who was the first Seminole saluted as the state's top college football player, gained 141 yards in FSU's 41-6 victory. 1954 brought FSU's first winning season against major college opponents. New faces included Ron Schomburger, Vic Prinzi, Gene Cox, and a highly touted running back, Burt Reynolds. Yes, Smokey and the Bandit, whose most famous run would be a 54-yard gallop versus Auburn.
It gets better every year. In the last 37 years, it's got up to 125 yards now. I start in the parking lot, go all across the Jordan-Hare Stadium. You know, as years go by, you get better and better because when we all get together, we lie more and more.
In 1954, Don Fauls left his job in the St. Louis Cardinals organization to become head trainer of a young athletic program at Florida State University. When he made his move to Tallahassee, Fauls figured the job would be a stepping stone to his great ambition of becoming a head trainer for a Major League Baseball team. However, Fauls found that the city of Tallahassee provided the perfect environment in which to raise his 3 children. And after 27 years of service and over 300 Seminole football games, Fauls retired from FSU in 1986. Fauls' stature, 5'7" and all of 145 pounds, along with his booming voice, earned him the nickname Rooster among players and co-workers. To some, he also became known as Doc, or Pop, or even Old Man. No matter what you called him, though, Fauls was much more than just a trainer.
I don't know if there's any one man that has the respect and love of all of the former athletes at Florida State any more than Don, because he treated and took care of all of them.
He was always there. We could always talk to Don Fauls. He was one of the most inspirational men that's ever been at Florida State University, ever.
He was such a very, very important person in my life, and I'm sure every athlete that he came in contact with. He was the glue here at Florida State. And he is a person who I call an icon at Florida State. and God, I miss him.
As the most recognizable link from Seminole football past to Seminole football present, Fauls is remembered as one of the most popular men ever connected with Florida State athletics. Following the 1954 season, FSU was invited to the Sun Bowl in El Paso, Texas, becoming the first Florida school ever to play in an out-of-state bowl game. The Tribe's players had such a good time that by the time the game kicked off, it was as if they had forgotten how to play. A team that led the nation with 19 touchdown passes wound up on the losing end to Texas Western. Despite the loss, one thing was becoming apparent. FSU had begun to carve its niche against Southern powers. FSU Athletic Director Howard Danford and Bob Woodruff of Florida scheduled a meeting to begin talks on starting an FSU-UF football series. With much resistance, UF finally agreed to a series with FSU, with several favorable conditions. The '55 season was also significant as the last for one of the most spirited players in Florida State history. An enthusiastic and inspirational leader, Bob Crenshaw played center and co-captained the 1955 Seminole football team. Crenshaw was known as a rough-and-tumble individual who would do anything for his team, and his never-say-die attitude persisted right down to his final game. With the Tribe belting Tampa, Crenshaw asked to go back in for one last play. He raced into the contest just long enough to get his teeth knocked out.
Wasn't an exceptionally great athlete, but a hard, dedicated worker. He'd come out early every day work. He stayed late snapping the ball.
3 years later, while serving his country, the Air Force jet that Crenshaw was piloting crashed. In honor of his courage and commitment, FSU established the Bob Crenshaw Award, given each year to the Seminole with the biggest heart. In the preseason of 1958, Nugent proclaimed the returning squad to be his most talented ever. They would not disappoint, with impressive wins over Tennessee Tech, Furman, Wake Forest, and Virginia Tech. Then, on the night of October 25th, the Tribe would record one of its biggest victories ever. Ironically, the Seminoles played the University of Tennessee only after the Volunteers scratched the University of Maryland from their schedule. Before the matchup, a Knoxville journalist billed the Seminoles as a second-rate gridiron power. Although many Seminoles took this personally, it was hard to argue the fact, as FSU was 0-10 against Southeastern Conference schools up until that time. Although scoreless in the first half, FSU found a way to get things done after intermission. Tennessee native Fred Pickard would gallop 133 yards on 22 carries and set up Florida State's first field goal. In fact, Pickard's total was 22 yards more than the entire Volunteer offense would gain. An Al Ulmer interception and a Bobby Wren reception made Tennessee pay in the 10-0 Florida State victory.
I think in '58, that win was the difference between Florida State going from what you consider maybe small time to big time.
We weren't going to let this one get by. And I'll be honest with you, after the second quarter, they never crossed our 50-yard line.
3,000 fans greeted the Seminoles back in Tallahassee.
We came into the airport, and when the plane went to circle the field, the guy said there's no room to land the plane. They had between 5,000 and 6,000 people on the ramp waiting for the team.
Winless versus the University of Miami, FSU would down the Hurricanes for the first time in '58. FSU struck first on a 42-yard interception return for a touchdown by Joe Majors. On a day in which every bounce seemed to fall the Seminoles' way, a Vic Prinzi pass ricocheted off FSU's Tony Romeo and into the waiting hands of Fred Pickard for a touchdown. the Tribe won 17-6. 4 straight victories catapulted the Seminoles into their first ever clash with the University of Florida. This rivalry was spirited from the very beginning. As FSU's Jack Espenship received the opening kickoff, he quickly handed the ball off to Bobby Wren. As Wren broke free from blockers, the Gator partisan writers in the press box all stood with a collective cry of "Stop him! Stop him!" Wren would be tackled at the UF 15-yard line after a 78-yard return. 5 plays later, FSU had the first lead of the series, 7-0. However, Florida would go on to win 21-7 after FSU starting quarterback Vic Prinzi tore a thigh muscle. While Don Veller sparked Florida State's football success, it was Nugent who kept the fire burning. He brought an air of confidence to a young school, trying to set the college football world alight.
Florida State was key back in those days because Nugent and Veller and all those guys did it the right way. They never cheated, they did it the honest way. We won some games, but we never prostituted our integrity to win any games.
FSU's continued rise would hit a plateau in 1959 as Perry Moss became the Seminoles' 4th head coach. Already an assistant at 5 previous schools, Moss arrived in Tallahassee amidst high hopes and great expectations. But following a 4-6 campaign and a huge contract offer from the Montreal Alouettes of the Canadian Football League, he left Florida State after only 1 season. His departure prompted FSU to hire a separate athletic director, Vaughn Mancha. The new head coach, Bill Peterson, would come from LSU. In 1960, Bill Peterson brought a flashy passing game to Tallahassee and an 11-year reign of success. Just 3 games into his first season, speculation among state writers was that Florida State would never be able to keep Peterson for any length of time. How wrong they were. In fact, by the end of his term, the whole nation would hear of FSU. In his final 5 years, FSU threw the ball more consistently and effectively than any other team in the nation.
Coach Peterson was fantastic if you're a wide receiver. If you were a running back, he wasn't the best to play for. And since I was a wide receiver, he was great because we had an exciting game plan in almost every game. We were going to move the football around.
Peterson's style and philosophy helped prepare his assistants for future success at many levels. Among the coaches in Peterson's pipeline were Don James, Gene McDowell, Dan Henning, Joe Gibbs, Bill Parcells, and Bobby Bowden. But Coach Bill Peterson would bring to Florida State something besides a fancy passing game, Petersonisms. Coach Pete had a wonderful way of putting the English language in a verbal blender and then turning out phrases at full speed ahead.
Eddie Feely used to give the little prayer before we went out on the field, before a game. And, you know, Coach Pete said one time, he said, you know, Eddie, I'll take over the prayer. So he goes, as I lay me down to sleep, and he goes, Feely, take over, you know. Or we were going in a 4-plane engine and that type of deal on our trips. But that was just Pete, you know, that was just Bill. And, he, you know, his mind was always ahead, you know, always a step ahead of himself, you know. So little things that he always did, you know, we just kind of laughed and just let go.
But one thing was obvious following the '60 season. The rapid turnover of the previous 2 years had left FSU with a lack of solid players. Recruiting intensified, and some great names would soon grace the campus. Fred Biletnikoff played split end at Florida State from 1961 to '64 under head coach Bill Peterson. He simply defined the role of receiver before it was ever called receiver. Biletnikoff became FSU's first consensus All-American and as a senior ranked 4th in the nation with 57 receptions for 11 touchdowns, plus an amazing 4 more scores in the Seminoles' 36-19 Gator Bowl victory over Oklahoma.
I love football. I love being a receiver. You know, I love being involved in a passing game. You know, at the time, you don't realize with the coaching staff how much they push you and push you and push you, you know, to get the best out of you.
Bolitnikov's career was capped with induction to both the college and pro football halls of fame. Combining great hands with football savvy and tireless work habits, Bolitnikov became Florida State's first great professional star. In only their 4th attempt against the University of Florida, the Seminoles would grab the biggest moral victory in school history. In a game that Gator head coach Ray Greaves would liken to a death in the family, FSU battled to a 3-3 tie. The 2-touchdown favorite Gators were held in check by an impressive Florida State defensive effort. Roy Bickford, the game's MVP, would grab 2 interceptions and block a punt to set up FSU's lone score. Action after the game was just as intense. FSU fans charged the field and attempted to tear down the goalposts. UF fans, trying to protect their home field, guarded them as a wild 30-minute melee erupted. Clearly, the Gators' dominance was on shaky ground. The 1962 season offered a prime example of how tough it was early on for the Seminoles to schedule opponents on a fair basis. With only 4 games slated for the friendly confines of Doak Campbell Stadium, this squad would have to be a gritty bunch just to survive. And gritty they were. The Georgia Bulldogs, with their top 10 ranked offense and defense and a vengeful attitude, sought to spoil FSU's hot start in Athens amid increased speculation that Florida State wished to join the Southeastern Conference. FSU would tally 5 interceptions on this day and begin to take its place among the big-time programs of the South. The Big Road victory also started another Seminole tradition. In 1962, Seminole football captains returned home with a piece of sod from Sanford Stadium as a trophy from Florida State's 18-0 victory over the University of Georgia. It was presented to Dean Coyle E. Moore, who then founded the tradition of the Sod Cemetery. The treasured turf was buried in the corner of FSU's practice field, and a monument was placed to commemorate the road victory. Sod games represent difficult battles, away from home, against the crowd, against all odds. In the most trying of circumstances, some of the most courageous victories have been achieved. The highlight of the 1963 season was an early humbling of a highly touted Miami team, led by George Myra, 24-0. The seeds of change were planted during 1963. However, those fruits would not totally ripen until 1964. The key to success would be a combination Seminole faithful would revere for years to come: Steve Tensey and Fred Bolitnikov. They comprised a feared passing attack that attracted the national spotlight to Tallahassee for the first time.
Well, back in those days, the pros and the colleges were 4 yards in a cloud of dust. So we started building a passing game, and finally, when we got the right personnel, in Tensey and Bolitnikov, it was like steel, really.
Their passing perfection remains the standard many Seminole fans measure by. But looking back on that bright '64 season, it was a group of rugged defenders who got FSU off on the right foot. While the Florida State offense slowly developed in 1964, one of the most famed defensive units in school history took center stage. Their symbol, the shaved head, was a takeoff from the movie The Magnificent Seven, in emulation of star Yul Brynner. The unit, coached primarily by Bob Harbison, consisted of the front seven: George D'Alessandro, Avery Sumner, Jack Shinholzer, Frank Penny, Max Wetstein, Bill McDowell, and Dick Herman.
One of them sneaked up behind me with a razor, and all I saw was all my hair falling over into my lap. And I said, go ahead, let's do it. They wanted to make a commitment. Cut all our hair off, and let's be the Magnificent Seven. Let's be a bunch of bald-headed guys, but let's have that camaraderie, that bond. We won't let our hair grow. We're going to go out there and be a formidable foe.
The defensive front received so much acclaim that the defensive backs would later dub themselves the Forgotten Four. As a testimonial to their effectiveness, the Seven Magnificents and Forgotten Four allowed only 66 points the entire season and recorded 4 shutouts. They finished as the nation's third-ranked rushing defense and 5th in total defense. The '64 season opened on a splendid note as Fred Biletnikoff's 9 catches for 165 yards and 2 TDs led FSU to a 14-0 shutout of the Miami Hurricanes. The Seminoles were off to a good start, but they would have to slay a bigger foe if they were to gain national respect. Kentucky brought that opportunity to Tallahassee for a homecoming affair. The Wildcats, undefeated and ranked 5th nationally after victories over Auburn and #1 Ole Miss, were no typical homecoming clown. But the Tribe made them look like one. In a landmark victory for FSU, one labeled among the biggest upsets of all time according to the Dunkel Index, FSU blasted Kentucky 48-6. With the victory, FSU jumped to number 10 in the AP poll, their first ranking ever. On November 21st, 1964, the atmosphere was electric. The moment had finally arrived. The Gators came to Tallahassee for the first time ever. This game would never have taken place in Campbell Stadium without the dedication of Vaughn Mancha and Dean Mode Stone.
We decided, with Dean Moore, Dean Stone, and myself, we would go to Gainesville, meet with their vice president and their athletic board chairman and Ray Graves to see if we can't work this dilemma out about a home and home. Dean Stone, after about an hour and a half or 2 hours of coffee drinking and arguing about across the table, Dean Moore reached over and said, Mr. Graves, how many seats will it take you to get Tallahassee 2 years from now? Ray said, well, Vaughn, I tell you, I think it'd take at least 45,000 seats. Dean Moore jumped up, put his hand across the table and said, all right, you got it.
Motivation, as if the Tribe needed any, was provided when the Gators practiced all week long in jerseys with the inscription, Never FSU, Never. On game day, UF swaggered onto the field with jerseys reading, Go for 7, as in their 7th straight victory over the Seminoles. Big mistake.
The game they went in there and they said, never FSU, never, you'll never beat us. Well, little brother had grown up, and they knew it.
Following a Florida State fumble, the Gators looked to capitalize early. But with their backs against the wall, the Seminole defense stood proud like so many times that season. Jack Shinholzer forced a fumble. George D'Alessandro recovered to set the tone for the entire day. In the second half, Biletnikoff sailed past 2 Florida defenders and was wide open for a 55-yard TD reception. Untouched and undaunted, Fred jumped into the end zone for the score. Florida reserve quarterback Steve Spurrier would later try to salvage a comeback, but to no avail. FSU would win this one 16-7. Coupled with the earlier victory over Miami, the victory garnered Florida State its first state championship.
We were expected to lose. You know, nobody expected us to beat them, and we went out there and we were just physical with them.
The win also helped FSU secure a major bowl bid in just the 18th year of the Seminole program. The Gator Bowl would be a matchup of striking contrasts. Oklahoma with its powerful running game against Florida State with its dazzling passing attack. The winningest team over the past 18 years versus the newest team to crash the national rankings.
We went down there, and oh, the awesomeness of Oklahoma. They had, everybody was an All-American at Oklahoma, University of Oklahoma. And here again, we might have been a little bit intimidated, but then again, we knew we were good.
I don't think we even knew what tradition was, you know, and we played a lot of teams with a lot of tradition that year, including the Gator Bowl team, Oklahoma, that, you know, it didn't make any difference to us. We didn't know.
The Seminoles would kick tradition in the head while posting some memorable numbers. Tennessee, 23 of 36, 303 yards and 5 touchdowns. Bolitnikoff, 13 receptions, 191 yards and 4 touchdowns. Together, the dynamic duo set 7 Gator Bowl records and were named co-MVPs of the contest.
Offensively, Oklahoma hadn't, you know, being in that conference that they were in, they never played against a passing team. All of a sudden they had to play against somebody that's throwing the ball 30 or 40 times a game, and they just were never ready for it, you know, and so we just went out there and just took the game to them throwing.
FSU crushed Oklahoma 36-19 in a game not as close as the score might indicate. FSU finished that 64 season with a 9-1-1 record, a number 10 national ranking, and 34 new school records.
We're just a bunch of guys that wanted to play football, loved football. We came down here involved in a program that was kind of a growing program. So all of a sudden, we pop up in collegiate football, we got a heck of a team. You know, and all of a sudden we're setting records, we're beating this team, we beat Florida, we're going to the Gator Bowl, we beat Oklahoma, that type of thing. And all of a sudden we get to be part of Florida State history.
They thought they could beat anybody, you know, there was just no question about that. They had confidence and they worked hard.
FSU's 4th straight victory over Georgia highlighted the 1965 season, which also produced the school's first 100-yard touchdown play. T.K. Weatherall, who later became a key member of the Florida legislature, took a Bill Moorman lateral on a kickoff versus Kentucky and sprinted for a score that still stands in the FSU record book. In 1966, FSU went 6-5, with 4 losses to teams ranked in the AP poll. None would sting worse than the defeat to the Gators on a certain, still controversial play. A 6'5" junior wide receiver, Lane Fenner, will be remembered in Florida State lore for a catch that didn't count. In the 1966 clash with the Florida Gators, with UF leading 22-19 and only 28 seconds left, FSU faced 2nd and 10 from the Gators' 45. When star receiver Ron Sellers was shaken up, Fenner came in for his first play of the game, his first play of the season, in fact. On a post pattern which Fenner turned to the outside, quarterback Gary Padgett rolled right and heaved the ball into the end zone, where Fenner appeared to grab the game-winning touchdown. However, to the tribe's dismay, official Doug Mosley ruled that Fenner was out of bounds and the pass incomplete. So apparent was the TD that FSU passed pictures around following the game as proof of the catch.
I can remember Lane catching the ball without a doubt, no question at all. And the ref was running down the sideline, signaling touchdown. And he got down there, and there were 1 or 2 Gator players that were signaling he was out of bounds. And by the time he had gotten there, he had changed his mind and said he was out of bounds.
1967 was similar to many previous ones at Florida State. The Seminoles' oldest and most persistent concern was depth. But 2 games against traditional power showed that depth was not always needed on a team stocked with heart and determination. Following the Tribe's season-opening loss to the Houston Cougars, Alabama awaited in Birmingham, defending national champions and winners of 21 consecutive contests.
Pete was trying to get us fired up, and he made some comments to the fact that they were no different than we were. I mean, they had 2 arms, 2 legs. They put their pants on, the same way we did, 1 leg at a time.
3 touchdown underdogs were the Seminoles in a game that was to be televised as part of an ABC Sports documentary on legendary Alabama coach Bear Bryant. Fulfilling an impossible dream, FSU pulled off an amazing 37-37 tie to shock the football world. The 37 points were more than the Crimson Tide defense had given up the entire previous year.
Kim Hammond and Sellers put on an exhibition of football that you've never seen before. That's one of the most interesting games that I've coached and was surrounded by.
The documentary would begin with a startled Bear bellowing on the sidelines just after FSU's Walt Sumner returned a punt for a touchdown. "What's going on out there? What the hell's going on out there?" Bryant called FSU the best prepared team he had ever played. Ron Sellers led the Seminole offense with 13 receptions, and the Tribe, 0-1-1 following the contest, were ranked 18th the next week.
Coach Bryant jokingly came up to me and says, "Are you Ron Sellers?" I said, "Yes, sir." "Yes, Coach." And he said, "Well, this is the closest that one of my players have been to you in the last 6 months, because there was nobody who was within 10 yards of you all night that night."
Before the Seminoles and Penn State met in the 1967 Gator Bowl, Nittany Lions coach Joe Paterno called Florida State the best passing team he had ever seen. Sheer flattery in the eyes of many, especially after Penn State raced to a 17-0 halftime lead.
Looked kind of dismal, for us, but, we went in together and the coaching staff said we can win this ball game.
Coach Pete gave us one of his little talks at halftime and told us guys we just need to bear down and grit our teeth and go out there and play the ball that we were used to playing.
Early in the second half, momentum began to shift on one single play. Still in front by 17, Penn State faced 4th and short from its own 15-yard line. Paterno made the surprising decision to go for it, and when his team failed to convert, the Tribe would gain momentum for the rest of the contest. Quarterback Kim Hammond hit Ron Sellers for the first Seminole TD, and a Nittany Lion fumble provided another chance soon after. The Tribe quickly cashed in and trailed now by only 3 points. With less than 30 seconds remaining and 4th and goal at the Penn State 8, FSU tied the game on a Mark Guthrie field goal. It was a remarkable comeback against a nationally known opponent and coach. The Seminoles finished 1967 ranked number 4 nationally by Sports Illustrated, following a 7-2-2 campaign. While in certain areas FSU seemed short in talent, never did the Seminoles lack at quarterback during Peterson's time. The late 60s were no exception, as 3 promising signal callers graced the campus. Bill Kappelman, Kim Hammond, and Gary Padgett took turns lighting up the Seminole skyline, with most of their tosses going to celebrated wide receiver Ron Sellers. Ron Sellers was the most prolific receiver in Florida State history and among the most productive in NCAA annals. In fact, Jingle Joints held most of the national receiving records from the end of his senior season in 1968 until 1987.
They said I was kind of elusive a little bit, but I was bow-legged as they come. And matter of fact, Floyd Little probably the only football player has bow legs worse than mine. So he just said I could walk over a fire hydrant without having to jump over it. And so then, because I was so skinny, and they just started calling me Jingle Joints.
From 1966 to 1968, Sellers accumulated 3,598 yards and 23 scores on 212 receptions. He caught passes in 30 straight games, averaging 119.9 yards per game. A member of the College Football Hall of Fame, Sellers' graceful stride and sure hands made him one of the game's all-time greats.
I ran inaccurate routes, but I could catch a football, and after I caught it, I was pretty good at running with the ball after I caught the ball.
Sellers, I think, is one of the great receivers of all time. The guy would go across the middle. He had great speed. He was a great kid to coach, great attitude, you know, and so he was a great, great kid.
When Bill Peterson arrived at FSU, Seminole football was floundering. He left the school with one of the most heralded offensive machines of the decade, and legends and lore aplenty. Jingle Joints, Bolitnikoff, the Seven Magnificents, the Alabama Tie, and so much more. His slips of the tongue may have captured the public's fancy, but Peterson's legacy was far more significant. He was as instrumental in putting FSU on the college football map as any other person.